to say, which means they're on a waiting list. Now we find out that 74% of the residents in Lardwes with private wells are also potentially going to be looking for assistance from this government to have this matter addressed. My question.
Order, please. The Honourable Member for Richmond has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Residents are once again asking whether this minister, in conjunction with the Minister of Environment and Labour, have turned their minds to addressing the fact that more Nova Scotians will be reporting these types of results. Therefore, my second supplementary again. Nova Scotians are aware that your department has received money from Ottawa to deal with social housing and housing issues. Will the minister today indicate whether he is finally prepared to take some of that federal money and put it towards housing grants that Nova Scotians and the residents of Richmond County can access?
Sure. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member opposite for bringing this up because this is a serious matter. And for some time now, Mr. Speaker, there has not been sufficient RAP monies across the country to address the demand. And certainly Nova Scotia is no exception to this rule. And in fact, the member opposite brings up a point, and we are working with the Secretary of State on this issue. He, in fact, asked me as the chair of housing the provincial territorial housing group to work with him on this, and I'm doing that, and I've encouraged my colleagues to send in letters of support to expand the RAP program. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Richmond on your final supplementary.
Speaker, I appreciate the minister saying it's a good idea that's coming on this issue. The only problem is I've been raising this since 1999. The government has refused to act. We've had home insurance now that is starting to tell seniors and low-income earners that they're being cut off unless they make significant costly changes to their homes. Now we have private wells being tested which show that there's going to be some cost involved there. My final supplementary to the minister, what more is it going to take for you to finally put the funding necessary in these programs to allow low-income earners and seniors throughout this province the ability to stay in their own homes?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the member opposite is perhaps extending a hand to lobby his partisan federal counterparts to work with us so that this can happen because, Mr. Speaker, in fact, this is definitely the wish of the provincial and territorial ministers. We're working together with them. Secretary of State Mahoney has indicated that he would like to work with us. He's asked for our assistance to bring this point to his federal counterpart, the Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, if the member opposite would assist in that regard, then perhaps this cost-share program can be expanded to address the demand.
Time allotted for question period has expired. Order, please. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations on the point of order.
Earlier during question period, I indicated to the Leader of the Opposition that I would table in the House staff's response with respect to airbags. And I want to table a letter from our department to all automotive repair shops concerning airbag deployment and the issue that the Minister spoke about, as well a press release that remains on the government website, as well, Mr. Speaker, the briefing notes on that issue that indicates clearly there have been no devices in Nova Scotia involved in a motor vehicle accident. So,
the information is tabled. Order, please. Opposition members' business. The Honourable House Leader for the Liberal Party.
Order first, Mr.
Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Member of Cape Breton South on a point of order.
Point of order first. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, earlier in question period, the member from Digby Annapolis asked a question regarding the Digby Quarry. And your ruling at the time was that this question was out of order because it was before the courts. And there seems to be some difference of opinion as to whether a civil matter applies here or whether it's criminal and civil matters that are before the courts or just criminal matters. I would ask the Speaker to perhaps rule on that and maybe tell us tomorrow what your ruling is. Or if you want.
I will. I think there was some. The Honourable Member for Coharbor Eastern Passage on that point of order.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess I'll just make note that I agree that with the point of order from the member from Cape Breton South. In particular, my understanding is that, I was just looking at Marlowe with regard to this, that the situation is it's predominantly criminal matters that we are trying to protect questions from being raised on. There are civil matters. I think there's some dispute as to whether civil matters are covered. In this particular case, in my understanding, the precedence, at least in federal parliament in Marlow, is that even in civil matters, the Speaker should have some discretion, and that discretion should be used, obviously, very cautiously where they think that clearly there's facts that are going to come into play. But in this case, I don't think that's the situation, and it would be important to have a clarification of the ruling.
I certainly agree. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Yes, yes, Mr. Speaker. On that point of order, I just want to point out for the benefit of the Speaker that libel and defamation matters in Nova Scotia are required to be tried by juries. And being one of the very rare civil matters that are required to be tried by juries, that obviously one of the concerns would be if it's a answer question in the House, that it may in fact affect the jury pool that would be available for the matter. And I also indicate that, you know, I certainly always understood to be all court proceedings, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please, if I could. The Honourable Member of Cape Breton South.
Just on a call of business.
Order, please. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I think that you'll establish that the precedents of this House have always been that applies to both civil and to criminal cases.
Just for the honourable members, I will take it under advisement. I just want to point out that when the question was asked, first of all, it wasn't quite clear. I did understand that it would have been before a court, and it wasn't quite clear at the time, but I still feel that under oral questions, 409 and Beauchesne says in subsection 9, a question cannot deal with a matter that is before a court, period. And although if you go to some other authorities, it does talk about civil versus criminal, and I think that I will take it under advisement, but I really believe that if to err on the side of caution in regards to an issue that may be before a court, I don't think we'd want to deal with something in this House that could influence something outside of here. However, we'll take it under advisement and report back. Opposition members' business, the Honourable House Leader for the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would you please call resolution number 489? And before you do that, Mr. Speaker, it's now 4:06, and I would ask you that you'll have to adjust the times between now and 6 o'clock in the spirit of the anticipated vigorous debate that will be coming on.
Thank you. And order, please. That resolution number
489.
489. Resolution number 489. The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to read the relevant clause on this. For Resolution 489, it's therefore be it resolved that the Finance Minister table in this House his specific plan to deal with the growing deficit.
Order, please. Order, please. There's quite a bit of noise in the chamber. I'd ask the members to take their conversations outside, please. The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park has the floor.
Thank you very much. As I said, this resolution relates to the outstanding deficit that we can see rising almost weekly in this province. Some weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, we were told that they were $32 million short in the first quarter results. So the projection for the year is $32 million have to be found elsewhere in order to balance the budget. Then more recently, we're told of the equalization problems and the problems of a lack of proper counting of the population. We're left with another $22 million in a shortfall. So really what we're talking about, as the resolution refers to, is $54 million that we know of as of today that is a shortfall in this year's budget. And we have only 5.5 months left to address it. So I think that we're in a considerably difficult situation, and the government should be called to task to show us how they intend to deal with that $54 million shortfall. It's a real surprise to me as a newcomer to the House to see what I see as a very great lack of specifics on the finance side. First of all, you introduce a budget which comes through in April and is passed to great fanfare, elaborate budgets for every department, and there's your plan for the year. But as it rolls out and as changes are noted, there's no mechanism that brings it back here to the House for accountability. And what we saw was the first quarter results announced on September 19th, showing that $32 million was missing from the budget, missing because of revenue shortfalls in projections and because of additional spending for district health authorities, and also because we're expecting higher wage settlements. Those things will happen through the year. We understand that there are a multitude of issues that can change through the year. Numerous factors affect both the cost and the revenues in the budget.
Order, please. The Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Revenues can be affected, as we've seen, by changes in the transfer payments from the federal government, from income tax changes as the economy unfolds for the year, whether that be personal income tax or corporate. It's affected by unemployment rates, by the gross domestic product, by the Canadian dollar and how that affects exports and purchasing. It's affected by national trends and disasters. It's affected by tourism and the number of visitors that we have in our province. So we know there are a multitude of issues. That only begins to scratch the surface. The revenue is also affected by fees that are collected and whether or not various departments or offices are active. So all of these things combine to affect the revenue we'll get, and there's a multitudinous number of expenses as well that can change through the year as demands change. And then we saw that specifically with our health budget going up $19.2 million as of the end of June, as of the most recent information available. As I say, being a newcomer to the House, it's interesting to me to see that we cannot yet even discuss the books for the year 2002-2003 because they're not yet closed. So it's very difficult to have a discussion on pertinent factors that affect the province today. And that's why it's more than ever important that the province provide information on where they see these cuts coming. The information that's known to us today is that we have this shortfall of up to $54 million right now. What we hear is that the Ministry of Finance, or Minister of Finance, is adjusting the spending across the board. But the word adjusting is not sufficient to help all of us understand where it's coming from. And that's the only thing we know for sure, is we were looking at a 1% cut across virtually every area of government. In reality, it's a 2% cut at least, because we're 5.5 months now left in this fiscal year. So the delays that occur just around the reporting and substance of our finances is very difficult to deal with at times. I'm sure the government would like to be more forthcoming in their information. I'm sure of that. Most branches of government don't have a great deal of flexibility when it comes to making a cut of even 2% in their annual budget when they're this far into a fiscal year. Their programs are underway, initiatives have already begun. They can't stop all of that right off the bat. So hiring freezes are one way they go about it. They leave positions unfilled if there are any such things. They'll try to cut back on staff because that's the one element that they can move on most quickly. It's the most flexible element. And so this will undermine government services even more if that is in fact how the cuts are going to be achieved. Because especially in any of our health areas, even if it's not frontline health, and I suppose it would behoove me to mention that in the announcement the government made on September 19th, they said that they would exclude frontline health care and primary to grade 12 education. But from what it appears now, there'll be a lot of cuts that will affect all the periphery of that. Still, half of the Department of Health budget would not be considered frontline health care. So we're looking at other services that are still very essential to the community and to the people. So again, as I said, the 2% cut this late in the year is going to create tremendous pressure on all departments, every branch, every office of government, as they try to find a way to respond in a fast and flexible manner to this cut. And I really do fear, and I would like the government to come forth and tell us where it's coming from, because I fear it will be in frontline services through the cutting of staff. And that will mean longer waits for all kinds of things, whether one area I see in our area is the length of time it takes to get your condominium registered, or things that don't affect everybody, but they lead to great disarray in the marketplace. Whether it's going to be things like how long you have to wait for home care, or how long you wait to be processed for any kind of community service or assessment in health care. So there's going to be tremendous pressure put on people. This fiscal problem and the accompanying harm to Nova Scotians is a problem that the government's own making, and now they are asking Nova Scotians to sacrifice even more. Last spring, the people of Nova Scotia were assured of a balanced budget, and we hear very often, I would say time and again, how the government is proud of that balanced budget, and that it's the second year they've had a balanced budget. But as I said earlier, we have yet to see whether the first year was balanced, because those books have not even been closed yet for the year 2002-2003. And we know there are pressures on that year because of the equalization payments that have to be marked against that previous year. So we haven't even yet seen whether or not we have had a balanced budget, let alone two. But the government has said they're committed to a balanced budget, and they're committed to their current scheme that's in place to allow the taxes to be reduced, whether or not we can afford it from the service point of view. So we're faced with a definite, clear pattern. We have to see $54 million cut out of the spending, out of government programs and services. Other provinces had planned somewhat better. If we look at New Brunswick, they identified a problem with their finances related to the BSE scare and the SARS problems and costs, and also the change in the equalization due to the census. Both New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island had made efforts to record that on their books so that there would be an amount set aside for that eventuality. Nova Scotia did not choose to do that. They chose a different route to see exactly, what would happen down the road, which isn't really very good planning. It may be wishful thinking that something would happen to mean that they would never have to own up or account for that money. Our government has refused to acknowledge the problems, and they failed to take action. They've refused to reassess or rescind the tax scheme in place for next year. They've refused to even reduce it or look at it again. And they failed to take any action.
Order. The time has expired. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to have an opportunity today to make a few comments on this motion. I was interested in listening to the previous speaker speak about numbers. She obviously has a number that is, in her opinion, is the deficit number. She's obviously made some assumptions about what things will happen and where things will happen. Mr. Speaker, the interesting question she raised with the House was, now that since she's come in here, there's no process. Well, Mr. Speaker, if she would go back in the legislation, she would see that the legislature anticipated this issue years ago, and therefore has put into place a reporting requirement for the first quarter at the end of September, reporting for the second quarter, and for the rest of the year at the end of December. So there is a process to go through. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia has come a long way in a relatively short time. In this government's first mandate, we pledged to balance the budget. In the third year of our mandate, we achieved that goal. We introduced the province's first balanced budget in 40 years. Mr. Speaker, it took years to build those deficits, and nobody thought it would be easy to eliminate those deficits and to bring the budget in balance. If it had been easy, it would have happened years ago. But, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians recognize the importance of a balanced budget, and they know it was an enormous challenge. Our first balanced budget was a challenge, and future balanced budgets will be a challenge, and we all know about the various incidents that can happen and come at different years. The honourable member mentioned about the equalization grants. What she didn't say, Mr. Speaker, is that a number of the provinces also booked the CHST money. Those provinces aren't on the accrual system, so they booked the equalization numbers. They also booked the numbers in anticipation of the CHST. And now those provinces know that perhaps that isn't going to come through as we anticipated. Nova Scotia chose not to because, Mr. Speaker, what we have chosen to do is deal with things when they become a reality. And that is the fundamental basis of accrual accounting, that you deal with things as you know that they're real and you can put a number on them. Mr. Speaker, when this government came into office, we were faced with a $500 million deficit. Now, you just stop and think about that, Mr. Speaker. $500 million, and we're to try to meet that challenge. And the members of the government before us, the Liberal Party, obviously had tried to come to grips with that. But when we finally finished the books and we had the books brought forward for the final year, it was a $500 million deficit. So, Mr. Speaker, there was some challenges with that. But we have worked our way through that, and we have come now so that we are in the position of presenting the next balanced budget for this year. And I will say again, Mr. Speaker, it's not an easy process to do. Mr. Speaker, not only do we say that, but two government rating agencies have boosted our credit rating based on the performance and our projections for the future. And, Mr. Speaker, those government rating agencies knew what the projections for GDP were. They knew what the projections for the gross national product was. They knew what the projections for employment in this province were. They knew what the projections for equalization. They knew what the projection for CHST was, Mr. Speaker. It wasn't a question that we just said, here, take a few of these files and look at these. Mr. Speaker, those agencies were in this province for sometimes up to 5 or 6 days reviewing over the details. They didn't just go to Department of Finance and say, what do you guys think? They went to different departments and they looked at the projections, they looked at their estimates and numbers, they looked around to build a business case. That's what they were doing, Mr. Speaker. It's got nothing to do with the question of are there are statements and what assumptions. Those people had to report and they had to build a business case to do it. And Mr. Speaker, they did that. And when they were done doing that, they said, yes, Mr. Speaker, we agree and we think things are moving a direction. They liked the fact, Mr. Speaker, that we had a lower debt to GDP ratio. They liked the fact that our foreign currency debt exposure had been accelerated and we had achieved the goals we had set in a much quicker time. And they agreed and they liked the solid economic performance we had in 2002 and indeed our expected growth for 2003. Yes, indeed, that growth is off a little bit. We're now, the GDP forecast of 2.9. We've dropped to 2.3 as we did in the economic update. We've indicated the Royal Bank and the Conference Board of Canada have recently come out updating their forecasts in that area. And so, Mr. Speaker, we didn't wait till October to do that. We did that back in September in our first economic update so we could start to take those actions that we were doing. And Mr. Speaker, we're putting money back into the hands of working people. We believe that a competitive tax structure is essential to our economic development. And it's not only us, Mr. Speaker. 75% of the members of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business agree. They said in their survey that they believe that this tax reduction will help people in the small businesses. They also agree that changing our business, our small business tax deduction to follow the federal government is beneficial. So they've agreed on those two. Mr. Speaker, with all of these factors, we acknowledge the financial pressures and we acknowledge the challenges that it is to put a budget together. And as the member just mentioned, when we did our economic update in September, we knew that our projections for revenue were wrong. But, Mr. Speaker, we also made the commitment about frontline health care and classrooms. We also recognized there was additional pressures on the DHAs and the health department, so we put additional money in for that. Mr. Speaker, that's having to find ways to adapt, making mid-course corrections, and adapt to deliver the challenges that people of Nova Scotia know that we need to do. Mr. Speaker, when we identified the $32 million in pressures, it was clear. We identified, and we were very clear to everybody, that $13 million of it was going to be because of our reduction in our outgoing forecast for revenues. An additional $19 million was to cover the cost of high-cost drugs and for overtime for the DHAs. That was crystal clear to everybody, and if it's not, I'm happy to provide them with a copy of the paper that we put out. Mr. Speaker, what we did as our plan is we've asked departments and agencies to look to ways to find ways of reducing spending. Now, yes, we went to them and we said we need to find the money of the $32 million and we need to find some savings. And we indicated to them the areas to look are those areas where there's unfilled vacancies, where there's people that are perhaps temporary, where there's unfilled vacancies as opposed to slowing down and bringing people back on. But that plan, Mr. Speaker, when it's done, when we finish talking to the departments, we've had a chance to talk to the departments, and indeed to ensure that the plans that come in meet our criteria. When we have done that, we will be happy to share that with the House and with all Nova Scotians, because that's our commitment. We said we were going to move on this plan, and we will be happy to do it. And we will happily present that plan. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to, once again, before we do that, to bring it to the people of Nova Scotia, is to have the opposition parties in and do what we did before the fiscal update, is to brief them on it, to answer their questions, to provide them with background material, so that they will be clear on where we're going. Mr. Speaker, there's nothing transparent here. It's quite simple. we have to meet the targets of our financial forecasts. It's just that simple. Mr. Speaker, it's what people do in their households, businesses do all the time. That's what they do. When your revenues start to show they're going down, you have to be able to find ways to adjust it. And Mr. Speaker, that's what we're doing. Now, we know uncertainties lie ahead, and I heard the honourable member mentioned about the federal transfers. Now, there's 8 different numbers out there, Mr. Speaker. You can choose the one that you like. There's one on the website. There's one I hear the honourable member from Halifax, Clayton Park, mentioning. There is a variety of numbers. The issue, Mr. Speaker, is very simple. We have been involved in this province, and all of the provinces across the country have been involved in trying to come to a new equalization agreement. Now, that's been the federal government's objective. That's the objective of all of the provinces, is to come to a new agreement on the equalization plan. Now, we know that that plan runs out on March 31st of 2004. I'm told, Mr. Speaker, that in the House of Parliament today they've introduced a motion to extend that plan until March 31st of 2005, simply for the fact that they're concerned that they won't get this plan done, and when they get it done, it won't clear the House. Because, Mr. Speaker, what they will tell you is if that plan is not in place and not approved by the legislature, they have no authority to pay out money to the provinces. So, Mr. Speaker, we've been working with them, as with all the provinces, to try to get that. Now, there's a variety of issues surrounding that. There is the 5-province standard that was changed in '86. The provinces are looking for a 10-province standard in the calculation. And yes, that would mean more money goes to the provinces. And the federal government have been saying, well, we perhaps can't afford it. So we said, fine, then phase it in over a period of time. There's the issue surrounding BC and Quebec. Mr. Speaker, they have concerns about the way assessment is done. They're moving from an income-based assessment to a real property value assessment. And they have concerns with that because, Mr. Speaker, if they move in that direction and it goes in the calculation, then they're going to come close to the precipitation where they don't fall under the equalization plan. But the majority of provinces, some which get equalization, some which do not, those provinces have said, let's go towards the 10-province standard, but they've also said something else. And the key part of all of the negotiations over the last 5 years are the issue, Mr. Speaker, of stabilization. Every province, it doesn't matter which one it is, has said we aren't able to take these large spikes and ups and downs in revenues because we forecast a figure, then all of a sudden a couple years later something changes and the spike goes up or goes down. We can't absorb that. For the last 2 years, the federal government has undertaken to find a process to try to do what they refer to as the smoothing process. And that process they've been working on, and Mr. Speaker, they presented that process to us in Ottawa some 2 weeks ago. So if that's the case, and they're going to do smoothing, and they're going to look out 5 years to do a smoothing on a variety of things, the provinces said to them, well, why don't you take that back to the start of 2000, and why don't you do the smoothing out over the few years? That would change the way the equalization is going to affect provinces. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, the federal government said they were prepared to look at that. What we then said, Mr. Speaker, is we as a region of the Atlantic provinces, 4 Atlantic provinces, are going to meet here in Halifax mid-November, and we would like you to devise and come back with a solution then. Because, Mr. Speaker, we have to deal with our current year, we have to deal with our next year's budgets, and we need to deal with those on a timely basis. So we've said to the federal government, we need you to respond here, and we need you to respond in a timely manner. And in doing that, we sort of tried to put a sunset on it and say, we're going to have this discussion in Halifax in mid-November when we have the meeting. So we've moved along to try to bring that to a head. And Mr. Speaker, all of these things are up in the air. So for any honourable member in this House to say they have a number that they know is what our equalization is going to change, for them, any honourable member in this House to say they know when and if we are going to get the CHST money, I would say they have a good crystal ball, Mr. Speaker, because the 10 provinces, the provinces and the territories and the federal minister that I met with 2 weeks ago don't have those numbers. The 10 provinces and the federal minister don't know if we're going to get the CHST money. What the minister would commit to the provinces is that they would not insert any other programs ahead. You be clear, Mr. Speaker, what the minister said when he talked about the $2 billion in health. He's saying now what I told and the commitment is that we have to have $5 billion on our budget, on our deficit. We have to have $2 billion in our contingency account. And when we meet those two criteria, what's left over, then we will take out to service the $2 billion they talked about in the CHST. Now, the question then to him was, well, what if you don't achieve the $5 billion and the $2 billion contingency? Are you going to be prepared to give some of that money? And that's under consideration. What he did commit to us is that he wouldn't put any other programs ahead of it. Now, he will tell you he has a lot of programs that could go ahead of it. And there's a lot of tragedies that have occurred across the country to go ahead. And Mr. Speaker, I think in closing, what I want to say is to the people of Nova Scotia, this government has brought the budget from a long way in a deficit position to our current balanced budget, and we will continue to move in that direction.
Order. Time has expired. The honourable member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The resolution on the floor this afternoon is, therefore, be it resolved that the Finance Minister table in this House his specific plan to deal with the growing deficit, which I can say without hesitation is something that we can support. But what I wanted to start my remarks on today was the fact that when I heard this resolution, I had the strangest sense of déjà vu. Or déjà entendu. I knew that I'd heard all this before. And I was thinking to myself, where have I heard all this before? And then I remembered, Mr. Speaker, it was 1998. It was 1998, and the Honourable Don Down was the Minister of Finance. That's the last time that the Liberals formed a government. Now, the member for Halifax-Clayton Park may not remember that so well, because that's back when she was a Conservative. But, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to remind that member and the members on the opposite side of the House what exactly happened in 1998 and why I have such a strong sense of déjà vu here. In the spring of 1998, the Liberal government introduced a budget with a claimed surplus of $1.8 million. Well, there was the small matter. Well, we won't go into that. That's ancient history. Anyway, they claimed a surplus of $1.8 million. But on September 30th, 1998, when the Liberal government released its first quarterly report, it turned out that they were now projecting a deficit. And it's very interesting, the then Finance Minister's description of this deficit. Now, I want to just paint this picture for you, Mr. Speaker. There was a $1.8 million projected surplus, and after the quarterly report, there was a $51 million and change deficit, adding up to a total of, believe it or not, Mr. Speaker, $54 million, exactly the amount that the Liberals today in 2003 are complaining about. What did the then Liberal Finance Minister say, Mr. Speaker? He called it a $51 million burp. There's the newspaper report, there's the headline. He called it a $51 million burp. He said, or it's a giant pothole, whatever you want to call it. Now, Mr. Speaker, so then we have a Liberal Finance Minister in exactly the same position as today's Conservative Finance Minister, and he dismisses it all and says, oh, this is just a burp. But I want to go on to talk a bit more about what that Liberal Finance Minister did. In the same quarterly report, he didn't update the revenue forecasts. So he was only telling part of the story, and the Conservatives at the time took him to task for only telling part of the story. The new deficit projection didn't include overspending by regional health boards or standalone hospitals such as the QE2. Finance Minister Don Down said he didn't know what those figures were. He also said, the finance minister, when asked, I should say that in order to deal with this deficit, the finance minister at the time, the Liberal finance minister, announced a program of government-wide restraint that would add up to $30 million. Almost exactly what this government has done. At the same time of year, they've done exactly the same kind of thing. When pressed, when asked how specifically the Liberal government would save that money in the rest of the fiscal year, Finance Minister Don Down couldn't say. Mr. Speaker, when asked, the Liberal Premier of the day, the Honourable Russell McClellan, said the plan was still a work in progress, Mr. Speaker. They suggested that the savings would come from government travel, a hiring freeze, and reduced capital spending, but Mr. Down had no specific examples. Now, Mr. Speaker, there's more to the story than that, because in the following two quarterly reports, the Liberal government of the day continued to claim that they had found savings adding up to almost, not quite, but almost $30 million. And then in the final quarterly report of the year, in May 1999, all those savings had evaporated, and the government was reporting no savings, as if the whole $30 million plan had been a mirage in the first place, which of course it was. So, Mr. Speaker, it is ironic, to say the least, to hear the Liberals complaining about something that this government has done when they did exactly, not approximately or nearly the same thing, but exactly the same thing only 5 years ago. The same amount of money was involved, the same issues were on the table, and the Liberal minister of the day had the same feeble excuses and defenses that today's Conservative finance minister is offering. Here's something else that the Liberal finance minister of the day said, quote, and as you listen to this, Mr. Speaker, I want you to imagine that the Liberal Party now, that they're on this side of the House, are complaining because our Conservatives are saying exactly the same thing. Quote, it would be folly to release a long-term fiscal strategy before the healthcare element is determined, said Mr. Down. Those who are clamoring for instant solutions to our current financial shortfall risk imposing short-sighted remedies on issues that have been building for a generation. End of quote. That was the Liberal finance minister's answer to the complaints that they were not telling the whole truth on the budget or on the fiscal updates. Now, Mr. Speaker, it would be easier to take the Liberals seriously if they had not done exactly the opposite thing when they were sitting on the government side of the House. The Liberal way is to say, do as we say, not as we did. Mr. Speaker, and make no mistake about it, there is plenty to complain about. Our government now reports its audited results on the basis of generally accepted accounting principles, and that's a good thing. But the quarterly reports do not have to be reported the same way. And there is still a lot of hocus pocus going on with the way that those unaudited financial projections are reported. What we need, both from Liberal finance ministers and Conservative finance ministers, is better disclosure of current results so that this legislature can make appropriate public policy choices. The standard that's applied in the private sector is the same one that should be applied here, exactly the same one. And that it is the responsibility of the Minister of Finance to present to this House and to the people of Nova Scotia credible information that is fairly interpreted. And Mr. Speaker, that, in my submission, is not currently being done by this government. It certainly was not done by the last government. We need quarterly updates that present the key risk considerations, both the upside risk and the downside risk. What events could occur and what is the likelihood of those events that the targets spoken about in the quarterly reports will not be met, Mr. Speaker? And if there was anything that, in my view, seriously impaired this current finance minister's credibility on financial matters, it was a recent example of what I would call upside risk, that the results will be better than forecast. That at precisely the time that it appeared that the financial results for the last fiscal year were going south, were turning out badly, that there were a number of elements that had not been taken into account, the minister announced that there was no problem. There was about $100 million not previously spoken about, accounted for, discussed, that things were about $100 million to the good in the last fiscal year, and therefore all of these series of financial hits could be absorbed no problem. Just when it's convenient, the minister pulls $100 million out of his hat. How did the minister do that? Still hasn't explained to us, hasn't explained to this House, hasn't explained anywhere. How can a minister wake up one morning and discover that he's got $100 million that he's never, ever mentioned in public before? I'm still waiting for an answer to that question. We also need to know the downside risks, Mr. Speaker, because certainly there's been a shock with equalization payments, and there is a real question, a legitimate question, about how long the government has known about that downside risk. It appears that the government has known about it for some considerable time. Certainly other provinces, other provincial finance ministries did. So the alternatives are simple. Either our finance ministry ought to have known about it and didn't, or they did know about it and didn't tell anybody. Now, Mr. Speaker, over the time that I've been the finance critic for the official opposition, I've developed a high respect for the professional staff of the Department of Finance. They know what they're doing. They do a difficult job, and they do it well. It's their political masters that I worry about. The people who take the information provided to them by Finance Department staff and decide how it's going to be communicated to this legislature and to the public. That is where the problem lies. At some point, not today, then some other day, the Minister of Finance is going to have to explain when did he know that census results were going to result in lower equalization payments. When did he know? And why did he not report it to this House as soon as he knew it? Because what is happening here, Mr. Speaker, is the same thing that happened under the Liberals. We all remember the failed Liberal public-private partnership scheme, or P3 scheme. They like to talk about schemes, so let's talk about their scheme. The Auditor General of Nova Scotia has said that the reason the Liberals made the P3 choice was strictly because of accounting treatment. Not because it was a good financial deal for the people of Nova Scotia, but because they thought they could build schools and keep it off the books of the province. That's why the Liberals made that choice. And it was a bad choice, because as we demonstrated in detail, it ended up costing the people of Nova Scotia millions of extra dollars, simply so that the Liberals could report the public accounts in a certain way. The problem that we have with provincial finances in Nova Scotia today is that this government is doing the same thing, but for different reasons. They would argue more honorable reasons. Perhaps they are, perhaps they aren't. This government is so politically committed to reporting a balanced budget that there seems no accounting rule, no convention of communication that they will not twist in order to present the results that they want. It is far more important to this government politically to appear to be in the black than to report, as I said earlier, credible information fairly interpreted. So now, when we get these quarterly reports, we don't quite know what to believe. When the minister says there's no money to pay for long-term care, we don't know whether to believe him or not, because when it was convenient for him, he just snapped his fingers and found $100 million. Mr. Speaker, this is a government that continues to strip seniors and their families of everything they have in order to pay for their health care. The only people in Nova Scotia who cannot benefit from the system of public medical insurance that we have, that is one of our proudest achievements in Canada. This government continues to say they don't have the money for it, at the same time, Mr. Speaker, that they are not fairly presenting the accounts of the province. I, for one, Mr. Speaker, do not believe they don't have the money. They know how to find the money when it's convenient for them. That is something they should find convenient. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Time has expired. Recognize the honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to speak in support my honourable colleague from Halifax Clayton Park when she made her presentation. And unlike the previous speaker of the NDP, I want to deal, Mr. Speaker, with the present. You can only change the present. Plan for the future. You can't change the past. So it's not much use in standing here and pointing fingers back at what they did or he did or they, whatever party was there. So let's concentrate on what we're dealing with today, Mr. Speaker. And I always like to take a positive approach when I speak, but today I can't. Mr. Speaker, I want to take a moment to discuss this resolution because it affects the interests of Nova Scotians from one end of the province to the other. The government has an obligation to tell the people where the cuts will come from, Mr. Speaker. People will find out the truth eventually, and the idea is the courage there now to tell the people where the cuts are going to come from, or do they have to wait until the spring budget arrives? Every department is under a cloud. When I speak to different people, all I hear is cut, 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 and more cuts. By being down at the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities Conference, Mr. Speaker, down in Yarmouth, and also dealing with the people on the Cape Breton end of it and here in the HRM, I've had the opportunity to discuss with people just using the Department of Transportation, for an example. And I've been told that although there are some paving going on in some programs, highways have been let go so long that the basic fundamental fact that I was told was, Gerald, I only have enough money to put out fires. That came from several people on Department of Transportation. And that is why you go over 10 potholes, you find one that's filled, then you drive over another 10. And you're wondering why they did the one in the middle. That was the one that got the most complaints, Mr. Speaker. We want the government to work in the best interest of the people. And I hope they plan to do that, because it's the best interest of the people that we're hoping to look after. We have an opportunity here in the minority government to cooperate, to work together, and we want to make sure that it's a responsible session of the government. It's an odd thing to have to quote, but when responses are coming from the government today, politicians have a very negative image out there. I've said on different occasions, I think I speak English, I think I understand English, but what did he or she just say? And it took me back to my childhood. One of my older brothers, Mike, who spent his life living in Ontario and wishing he was back in this wonderful province, he used to say to me, Jerry, do you know what that sounds like? It sounds like a chicken with the pip. And if you could explain that one to me, that's what it sounded like, and that's what I hear today, Mr. Speaker. That's an old saying, it's a long time, but that's what I have to equate it to. So I urge the Minister of Finance to table the cuts today in the House, Mr. Speaker, so that Nova Scotians can understand the impact on their lives. As I said, and go back to Department of Transport, I'll just focus on Department of Transportation again, Mr. Speaker. Workers retire and they're not replaced. Summer workers go out to do patching work and seem to be going out late and being finished early for lack of funding. Winter workers get called out late for plow operators and whatnot, and are let go as soon as possible. So they're working under a cloud, and it's kind of a hard way to have to make a living. You work for a department for years and years, and you're always under a cloud of, do I get enough work or don't I? Mr. Speaker, the cuts can come in several forms. And the Honourable Minister of Tourism admitted today in the House when questioned that, yes, there are cuts coming to his department also. And as we heard, that there will be cuts in all departments. But tourism is a multi-million-dollar revenue generator for this province, Mr. Speaker. And we should be in a position where we're infusing more money than cutting money. And I go right back to the tax cut again. You give $147 million and then turn to work and cut the equivalent in services. So it just doesn't balance out, not in my way of thinking anyway, Mr. Speaker. I touch on the hospitals. A relative of mine that worked there for 20 years recently retired, basically forcefully, because basically run raggedy in the emergency department, where they worked along with all the nurses. Even the floor girls are doing work that 3 and 4 other workers should be doing. They're cut back to the bare bone. The nurses are run off their feet, and it's a threat to health care and the service that's being given, Mr. Speaker. Somebody mentioned home care today. The question came from the NDP side of the House about home care. I had an incident in my area. I had a call, Gerald, can you increase home care for this elderly person? I made a call. I was kind of unpolitely informed that I shouldn't be calling there because this person was in a position of authority. And anyway, I made the call, and I requested that the time would be increased. The lady was looking for 2 visits a week, not 1. The 1 visit she was getting was a 2-hour visit a week. By the time that she received her bath and whatnot, the 2 hours were consumed. I kind of insisted that she could really use 2 visits a week. I was called and told, Mr. Sampson, you got your wish. Well, I was very pleased at being effective at this. Lo and behold, I got a call within a week from the lady herself saying, Gerald, what they did was take my 2 hours in my 1 visit and cut it into 2 visits, 1 hour each, which then provided not even enough time for a complete bath. So that's what cutbacks are doing, Mr. Speaker. And I move now to the residential care project in Truro. And I surely hope that that's not one of the ones that's going to be delayed, as was evidenced when the honourable member from Glace Bay spoke today. And I hear a lot of reference to DHAs. When you talk about a DHA, it's like saying ABC. There's no personality, there's nothing to it. It's rather a cold way of referring to something. But if you said the District Health Authority, now that's more effective. And that's what we're dealing with. So I prefer to deal with them in their proper name because it shows the severity that we're dealing with. And the first question today to the Premier was cuts in the local Aberdeen hospital. And the rumour mill is rampant, Mr. Speaker, and it's give a tax cut, but cut more services. And that worries me on behalf of the people of Nova Scotia. And as I said, we have a poor reputation as politicians. Some of the examples, well, some of these cuts we'll feel immediately, but there's going to be some more cuts, Mr. Speaker, that are going to come through the back door. As we experience the increase in user fees, that was mentioned in the House here today. Housing Department was mentioned here today in the House. I have numerous calls from seniors, and when I discuss with the Department of Housing, on the getting these grants for people. Their focus is totally on emergencies, leaky roof, lack of electricity, or heat and water. They can't focus on refurbishing some windows and doors that might keep an elderly person in their home just to keep out the winter drafts and cold, Mr. Speaker. So there's more money needed there, not cuts. Some people may refer to the cuts as pass the buck. After being in municipal government, that word downloading has become a very, I don't know how you, it's a negative word. It's a word that nobody seems to want to use. But when you're on the bottom rung of the ladder in municipal politics, as long as I was, and any of that stuff, Mr. Speaker, we all know it runs downhill. And when it stops with the municipal politician. And you're being asked to do more with less, and I don't know how you can. One of the things in the downloading vein that I'd like to touch on is the cost of assessments. $12 million, I understand, is what the cost of running that department for the year is. The cost, and I'll speak about Victoria County because that's what I'm familiar with. The cost of Victoria County, Mr. Speaker, was $147,000. Some of the large municipalities, that's only a drop in the bucket. But what it meant to Victoria County was a 5-cent increase on the tax rate. Because of us being so frugal and keeping a tight lid on things, we were able to absorb that. But that was just one cost that came forward, Mr. Speaker, and that's a detriment to a municipality with a small $6.5 million budget. Nova Scotia Power finally, after a lot of haranguing, we don't want to touch on that, but that's a common theme. After all the media attention, and I'm sure Nova Scotia Power don't like it either. Finally, 2 years in a row, this year and last year, we got $39,000 taxes paid to Victoria County. And you're well aware of CBRM pushing for the assessment, the proper assessment of Pointe-Noquonee and Lingan, Mr. Speaker. I presented the budget one time 3 or 4 years ago at the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities Conference to the honourable members of the day. That budget showed in black and white figures that 52% of the budget was predetermined by the province. So how can, and all you got to do to put that into perspective is if I or anyone walk into your house and take a hold of 52% of your money and ask you to operate the way you always have. It's almost an impossibility. Cost of education has increased, and it's going further. Policing costs have increased. Another reason that we have the negative image that we have, and I focused on it here in the House not too long ago, the meeting that was held pertaining to Aboriginal education. Now, Gordon McIver is the CEO of education for Aboriginals in Cape Breton. Chief Morley Gugu and he were both totally incensed at the fact that a meeting was held without representation from them. I feel that you lead by example. Pay your own way. Live within your means. And that way there you become credible, Mr. Speaker. And I don't think we're doing that the way that the present situation is. Whether municipal assessments are going to be downloaded, we know municipal assessments were downloaded, but I'm also thinking of the cost of road maintenance. Will that be downloaded to us next? And if it is, it brings forth the big question, Mr. Speaker. Is it now time to ask this government whether or not it will download the current budget crisis to municipalities? Is it all coming down, or is it coming down little bits at a time? And slow and steady, you feel the effect, or if it comes down all at once. Sooner or later, we're going to have it downloaded to municipalities where it does not belong. I'm hoping also, Mr. Speaker, that the provincial portion of policing costs, I think of the rural areas where they're policed by RCMP, and some of the other areas that have their own police forces. But the provincial portion of RCMP policing, I just hope that's not part that will be downloaded to municipalities. But if it's downloaded to municipalities, there's only one taxpayer. When the bill comes to the municipalities, it will automatically be downloaded onto the taxpayer. Mr. Speaker, we also have the Sable Gas Project, which is a bad deal for Guysborough and Richmond if the government settles for a less tax assessment on that. Mr. Speaker, the government has an opportunity to clear up the confusion, because now the municipalities are like children of abusive parents. One time they were allowed to keep a few crumbs if they fell off the table. Now there's not even any crumbs. Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the minister to table the list of cuts today so that we are assured that the government is not downloading onto municipalities. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Order. I recognize the Liberal House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would you call resolution number 289?
Resolution number 289. Recognize the honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A chance to debate one of the most important issues, I think, facing this province today, the issue of wait times in health care. Mr. Speaker, the resolution dealing with the fact that the Ham government has yet to release any information with respect to improvements in wait times since they have assumed power, and the defensive response provided by the Minister of Health in this House that further illustrates that either the minister is either not concerned or perhaps the government is hiding this information with the cancellation of surgeries that have been occurring in this province, albeit some of them because of the effects of Hurricane Juan over the past number of weeks, delays in approval of district health authority business plans. Mr. Speaker, we are more than halfway through the fiscal year for district health authorities to come up with their business plans. This government has done absolutely nothing about it. Absolutely nothing about it. The resolution says that, therefore, it should be resolved that the Minister of Health realize this is not just an issue of politics, one of vital importance to Nova Scotians and to those especially who are currently on wait lists. It's an issue of concern to each and every Nova Scotian. Mr. Speaker, I don't think we have to go any further than our own constituencies and talk to our own constituents who have had to go into an ER room, who have had to wait for perhaps orthopedic surgery, who have had to wait for any number of services that are offered by hospitals, to know that wait times in this province are not getting shorter, Mr. Speaker. They're getting longer. In some cases, it is approaching or is at a crisis stage in this province in terms of health care. To further prove that, Mr. Speaker, again, this is not just me standing here and saying that. To further prove that, just this week, as a matter of fact, a report was released by the Fraser Institute, Mr. Speaker, a report that indicated that indeed, yes, the Fraser Institute's 13th annual Waiting Your Turn document, 13th annual, one of the most extensive wait time documents that's produced in this country. Use it as a guide because we have no other guide here in Nova Scotia as to what's happening in our health care right now pertaining to wait times. It shows that one of the areas that stands out, for instance, is orthopedic wait times. If you take an example from referral from a general practitioner until treatment, then wait times for orthopedic surgery in this province have increased by 9 weeks, an increase almost 2 months over last year's, Mr. Speaker. So Nova Scotians, according to the Fraser Institute, are waiting 11 months for orthopedic surgery. There's some pretty dismal results from the Fraser Institute's report, Mr. Speaker. There's information provided in research, the result of research across the province in almost all of the studies on wait times for various procedures. Who is at the bottom of the list? The province of Nova Scotia is at the bottom of the list. The number of procedures waited for rose from the year 2001 to 2002 in this province. There's the longest wait in the country for an MIR, Mr. Speaker. The longest wait in the country at 24 weeks for an MRI. The previous health minister should know that, because a lot of these statistics, Mr. Speaker, are the result of the work of the previous health minister, which has led us to this situation. The mess that we're in came from previous health ministers, the ones that are left over on that side of the House, Mr. Speaker. So we know what's led us here. Now it's a matter of just trying to finally do something about it. The waiting period, for instance, Mr. Speaker, we want to go there, that's fine.
Minister of Education on a point of order.
Member get up and talk about the health system, because it was about this time, about 18 months ago, that he came to me and told me what a great health system we had.
It's not a point of order. The honourable member for Glace Bay has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not here to talk about something that happened to me personally or make jokes over on that side. I'm here to talk about Nova Scotians who are waiting abnormally long times for certain procedures in this province. They can't get waited on in an ER room. They can't get orthopedic surgery. And the former minister knows that. It's in a mess in this province. The latest result is indicated today with what happened at the Aberdeen Hospital in New Glasgow, and nurses actually being laid off, positions eliminated, I should say, in the Aberdeen Hospital, Mr. Speaker. Half of the pediatric beds there closed. And the minister would say, sure, what happened in my instance? I don't want to go there. What happened in my instance was great care. And the minister knows that happens. Sure it does. I'll be the first to admit it. Standing here, speaking as I am, is proof of that for the former minister. But what I'm talking about right now is wait periods in this province. For instance, from referral by a general practitioner to appointment with a specialist rose in the past year. The wait is now listed at 8.8 weeks. The waiting period from appointment with a specialist to treatment has also risen to 10.6 weeks. And now, you cut the nursing positions, for instance, in New Glasgow. It essentially goes against exactly what that government was saying it would not do. It would not do anything to frontline health care in this province. Matter of fact, it promised to recruit 500 more nurses and doctors in Nova Scotia. How, as the current Minister of Health indicated outside today, how can eliminating 5 nursing positions in this province not affect frontline health care? If nurses are not frontline health care employees and workers, then who is, Mr. Speaker? And how can that not have a dramatic effect if you start closing pediatric beds? If you start, for instance, in Glace Bay, where you really have to start guessing now when the emergency room is going to be open. You have to pay special attention to radio broadcasts or newspaper ads to see when your ER is open or not open. The same situation occurs in the Valley on a regular basis. In Yarmouth, you can't have, there was a point when you could not have a baby on the weekend. You'd have to travel hours away in order to give birth. And Mr. Speaker, either the former minister or the current health minister can stand up and say that health care is in great shape in Nova Scotia. Is that just a case of them being naive, Mr. Speaker? Or is it a case of just not caring what's going on? Or is it a case of not knowing what's going on in the healthcare industry, Mr. Speaker? You can't take care of the business, and I'm sure this is what district health authorities are saying. How can they possibly plan? How can they properly plan when they haven't been given any indication from the province as to what they're planning for or what's to be cut from their government? Now they have to wait. As I said, more than half of their fiscal year is gone, and they still haven't been able to do their job. And Mr. Speaker, this government starts talking about cuts, and they start talking about, they're going to balance the books. They're going to balance the books on the backs of nurses or on the backs of hospital workers, healthcare industry workers. They're going to balance the books for sure on their backs no matter what. Mr. Speaker, it will put us in in a very grave position in this province. And that's clearly indicated by the Fraser Institute's report that has been released, that wait times in this province, Mr. Speaker, are not moving in the proper direction. And indeed, it's a case that this government has broken its promise, in effect, that it was promised not to affect frontline health care. And what they've broken that promise with is their own fiscal mismanagement, Mr. Speaker. That's what's happening. And now we're paying the price for it. Not only the nurses at the Aberdeen Hospital, I suggest, Mr. Speaker, that there is more to come. That we've only seen the first part of what's going to happen here. A healthcare system is going to pay, for instance, for that government's rhetoric, and that government's, let's go back, because we all know that in the end, when you start giving $147 million, throw out your $147 million tax scheme, and you know because of that, because you have lived up to that promise, that because of that, health care is going to suffer in this province. There is no doubt about it whatsoever in my mind. Mr. Speaker, as I said at the beginning of my speech, you need go no further than your own constituency, or each and every one of us here can check with our constituents. And I'm sure that there's not an MLA in this House who has not had a complaint at one time about what's happening at their local hospital, their local health care center, about waiting times. Whether you be waiting for, as I said, in an emergency room, or you're waiting for orthopedic surgery, or you're waiting to get to see a specialist, whatever the case may be. And we know how serious the problem is. I hear about it all the time. I hear about it, and this has nothing to do with the healthcare facilities in my area. It has nothing to do with the healthcare workers in my area. Dedicated people that are working, and breaking their backs, actually, to try and provide health care to the people of that area. But they just can't do it. They just can't do it. And in some cases, the constituents are saying that they've been waiting for hours, whether it be blood work or an x-ray or whatever the case may be. But, Mr. Speaker, to have to wait, as the report has indicated, to have to wait 24 weeks for an MRI in this province, the longest wait in the country. And you can take all of the resources and you can take all of the money and you can sink it into these things that are now necessary in this world. MRI is a great diagnostic tool. And if you have that, but still you have to wait that long to use it, Mr. Speaker, then what purpose is it serving? And why is that? Let's get to the root of the problem. Why is that happening in this province? Why should we have to wait so long to see a specialist? Why should we have to wait so long to get a referral from a general practitioner for an appointment with a specialist? Why are we closing obstetric units at the Northside General Hospital in North Sydney? Why is that happening, Mr. Speaker? Well, for close to 5 years now, this government, under various ministers of health, has had the opportunity to make some changes. This was a government that, when it came to power, said they were going to fix the health care system in this province, and they were going to do it for next to nothing, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it has not occurred. All of the statistics, all of the reports, all of the indications, all of the first-hand reports that we're getting from frontline healthcare workers are telling us that the situation has not been fixed. Indeed, the situation continues to worsen. Our healthcare industry is sick, Mr. Speaker, and it needs some help. It needs some help. It's not getting it from this government, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned, trying to, and part of the problem is trying to balance the books, with very narrow view of exactly what's happening and what's needed in the healthcare industry, but instead just seeing that bottom line and focusing in on that at the expense of everything else. Mr. Speaker, it does not work. If we have people who are waiting, as you've read many, many times in newspapers, letters to the editor, people who are waiting for 10, 12, plus hours in emergency rooms to be seen, just to be seen, then, Mr. Speaker, it's a clear indication that there is something wrong in the healthcare industry in Nova Scotia. And, Mr. Speaker, in closing, I know I don't have much time left, but in closing, what is clearly indicated here, whether it be a report from the Fraser Institute, whether it be nurses in our hallway here from the Aberdeen Hospital who are saying, look, it's not right to close half of the pediatric beds, whether it be the people of Yarmouth saying we should have our hospital open on the weekend so that women in our area can have babies, people in Glace Bay who are saying keep our ER open on a regular basis. Why is it closing from time to time? Why can't the government do something about this? It's your responsibility. People at Soldiers Hospital in the Valley, you know, why are we at this stage? Mr. Speaker, I suggest to you it's because of the mismanagement, both fiscal, the incompetence of this government that made it one of its key promises when it was elected the first time in 1999 that health care would not suffer as a result of them coming to power. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, it has. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I welcome this opportunity to discuss the very important items that are discussed in the resolution. And I want to preface my remarks, Mr. Speaker, by pointing out to the House and to all who are interested in this very important topic that we are in a situation where we have in fact increased funding to health care in this province. In last year, we increased it by $131.2 million in last spring's budget. That, Mr. Speaker, included an amount of over $43 million to the district health authorities and the IWK. And we also, subsequent to that, Mr. Speaker, added an additional $19.5 million to the district health authorities to assist them in addressing matters relative to the increased costs of nursing care and increased costs related to the aging population within our facilities. So that, Mr. Speaker, does not translate into cuts to the health care system. We have made great progress, and the DHAs in this province, when we came to power, were coming in with double-digit cost overruns, Mr. Speaker, on their budgets. That has been improved immeasurably, Mr. Speaker, to the point where most DHAs in this province are able to come in on budget in this current fiscal year. We are, in addition to the numbers I just referenced, we are also picking up the increased cost of wages for healthcare workers in the healthcare system. That is part of the budget in the previous year. So, Mr. Speaker, for members to stand in their place and to use the term cut in relation to the activities of this government and healthcare is very far from the reality of the situation where we are involved in increasing funding on a year-over-year basis to all of the facilities that provide health care in this province. Now, this issue, Mr. Speaker, is common to all of us, and it is not unique to this particular province. It is an issue that affects the entire country. We know that in this province, people who urgently need a test or treatment get that care without delay. And for example, at the Queen Elizabeth II, no one is on a wait list for urgent cardiac procedures. People awaiting less critical or elective tests and treatments do wait longer than they should. And while we are committed to turn this around, this situation is not unique to our province. It is common to our closest neighbours in the Atlantic provinces and common to the largest health centres like Edmonton, Toronto, and Montreal. And we are talking about this today because it is an issue of common interest among the men and women in this room who represent Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, I know all the members commonly agree on something else too. The work of our healthcare providers to address these challenges on a daily basis has been nothing less than admirable. And on September 28th, Nova Scotians saw one of the most powerful storms we have seen in over 40 years rip through our province. It took our power lines down, it disrupted water and other public services, and it stopped our lives for days. Hospital buildings and the homes of healthcare workers and patients were not spared, Mr. Speaker. Surgeries were canceled, appointments postponed. The wait lists for many services grew as a result of this catastrophe. Yet, the nurses, doctors, technologists, specialists, administrators, and others who have been working tremendously long hours and have been committed to ensure urgent patients did not wait. Mr. Speaker, these people are to be commended for their inspiring efforts. Mr. Speaker, at this time I would like to share with the members what I saw and heard while on a tour of the Centennial Building at the Queen Elizabeth II Health Science Centre in Halifax last Friday. This was the hospital most heavily damaged, the hospital's most heavily damaged building during the Hurricane Juan. Mr. Speaker, while I was there, I was able to first of all see the extent of the damage on the roof itself. The whole section of the Centennial Building had the roof literally ripped off of the surface and transported across the property over to adjoining buildings and right across the entire space. And you can in fact see the marks off the roof on the side of buildings that it was blown to. That, Mr. Speaker, resulted in the entire roof being exposed to the torrential downpour that occurred. And as a result of that downpour, Mr. Speaker, as you travel through the operating theaters and you travel through the hallway servicing those operating theaters, you were able to see the locations of water which literally poured out of the ceiling, poured out of the walls into the theaters. Mr. Speaker, I was shown a stairwell where the water that was flowing down that stairwell was paramount to a waterfall with tremendous force, a force so powerful that it was difficult for workers to stand in that water that came cascading down that stairwell. That force, Mr. Speaker, and that water created incredible damage to that particular building. But what was really incredible was the work done by the nurses and the technologists and those who were employed in those operating theaters in saving the equipment, very expensive equipment, taking that equipment, traveling through water up well above their ankles, Mr. Speaker, and pushing that equipment to safer areas, carrying that equipment, working extremely hard under very, very difficult circumstances. That, Mr. Speaker, is what went on, and that is the kind of dedication that was exhibited by the healthcare workers who were employed in that particular facility. Mr. Speaker, I was accompanied on the tour by the head nurse, Sonny Russell, who came and related to me the work that was done by these healthcare workers. And Mr. Speaker, I met a number of the workers on that tour, and I was totally impressed by their dedication to getting those facilities up and running and operating again. And Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to report that indeed they met their objective, which was to be up and running on Monday, services fully restored. That only happened because we had public servants in this province, healthcare workers, who were willing to forget their own difficulties, their own properties which were damaged by the storm, and dedicate themselves to restoring the level of service in that facility. And I informed Nurse Russell, Mr. Speaker, on that occasion, and I'm sure that I spoke for all members of the House, because you did pass a resolution unanimously to that effect, that members of the legislature very much appreciated their efforts in getting the healthcare facility back and running. So, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the opportunity to relate what I was able to see as I toured that facility, because we are blessed with dedicated healthcare workers who work so hard on that occasion. Mr. Speaker, we know that weeks and months after the trees and bushes are picked off the streets and after windows and roofs are fixed, the effect of WAN will still be felt on the healthcare system. This impact reminds us just how much our healthcare workers do every day. Yet, while their extraordinary efforts continue, for those patients and their families that are waiting, I know that this is not an easy time for them. I want to assure them that anything that can be done is being done, and the department remains in regular contact with the Capital District to help in any way that we can. Of course, well before the hurricane, Mr. Speaker, our government was working on a plan to reduce patients' wait times for tests, treatment, and care. The plan involves, first, getting meaningful, reliable information, second, using the information to shorten wait lists, and third, investing in the right equipment, and fourth, sharing more information to increase accountability. Mr. Speaker, parts of our plan are well underway. We are fortunate to have some excellent health professionals on our provincial waitlist committee. In fact, the chair, announced before I became health minister, is from my very own constituency, Dr. Mike McKenzie, Chief of Staff in the Guysborough-Antigonish Strait District. The Provincial Wait Time Monitoring Project Committee has found that there is a lack of consistency in wait time data. And for many areas of the healthcare system, there is no wait time data collected at all. This group is developing clear standards, so as we measure wait times across the province, everyone is measuring the same thing. This will lead to reliable and comparable information on wait lists and wait times, essential to improve patient care, healthcare planning, governance, and accountability to the public. To start, the group will be focusing in 3 areas where Nova Scotians are experiencing the longest waits. These are, Mr. Speaker, the time to see a specialist once referred by a general practitioner, waits for diagnostic tests like MRIs and CT scans, and the wait for orthopedic joint replacement surgery. They are working with district health authorities to ensure these issues can be improved over time. Yet, change cannot happen overnight. This is a complex system and a very large issue. A common sense approach from healthcare experts across the country is that it will take time, money, and people. The committee and our healthcare professionals know this, yet are focused and continue to work diligently. They are to be applauded for their dedication to the project and to make recommendations that will make the biggest difference to Nova Scotians. Of course, even more importantly is, when we have good, reliable information, how do we use it to shorten wait times? This brings us to step 2 in our plan. The Waitlist Committee is looking at actions taken in other provinces, such as coordinated wait lists, that enable patients and their health professionals to see where wait lists may be shorter and may allow them to access the tests and treatment more quickly. The committee's first report, expected before the end of this calendar year, should help us understand the current status and the next steps. I know all members of this House look forward to reviewing this important information. The third step of our waitlist plan is also critical, investing in the right people and equipment to provide critical tests, treatment, and care to patients. This government has already demonstrated that we are prepared to act and to invest when we have good information on which to base decisions. Since cardiac tests and surgeries are provided at just one hospital in Halifax, we already have good data there, and we know that people are waiting too long for elective procedures. That's why we invested an additional $5 million this year, which capital is used to increase staff and equipment to in turn reduce wait times in cardiac tests and surgeries. Now, Mr. Speaker, we have also and I want to express our appreciation to the Government of Canada, invested $30 million for additional diagnostic equipment. And we will soon be making additional announcements throughout the province with respect to more diagnostic equipment from additional $45 million that's provided by the federal government. This is much welcome money, Mr. Speaker, and we're very grateful to them for having it, and it will allow us, with the report of the Wait Time Committee, to address this issue more effectively than we are now. And that, Mr. Speaker, is progress that can be made, and it is progress that will be real. And I believe that probably brings me to the end of my allotted time. Again, Mr. Speaker, I remind members and everyone, we have increased budgets for health care in this province, not decreased.
Thank you. Time has expired. Recognize the member for Halifax Needham.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to have an opportunity to rise in my place and speak on what I think is an issue of great concern to many Nova Scotians, and that is the extensive waiting times in our healthcare system for getting access to a specialist, getting a timely diagnosis, in particular areas, as the minister said, particularly with respect to orthopedic procedures, joint replacement surgery. There seems to be extensive waiting. And I think the other area that certainly can be part of this mix here, Mr. Speaker, is the extensive wait times that people often experience when they go to emergency departments. And I think that's an equally important area for government to pay attention to and attempt to address. I want to echo what the Minister of Health had to say with respect to the words of appreciation that he extended to all of the healthcare workers and the employees of the Capital District Authority in the face of the destruction that had such a serious impact on the QE2 during Hurricane Juan. This is a situation where we know that prior to the hurricane, we already had fairly extensive wait times for surgery in that particular facility, which is the main tertiary care healthcare facility here on the mainland of Nova Scotia. And the fact that more than 600 surgeries have now been canceled because of the shutting down of some of those operating rooms is of great concern. I know that prior to the hurricane, I was contacted by a constituent of mine, older woman who has some serious back problems and is in a great deal of pain and has had surgery but requires more surgery, Mr. Speaker. And, you know, I wrote the Minister of Health and asked him what his plan was to address the extensive waiting times for people like this lady in my constituency. And Mr. Speaker, I was very disappointed in the letter that I received back from the Minister of Health, because he essentially did not address my question about what the government's plan was with respect to reducing wait times. and basically referred this woman to her surgeon and to her specialist. And Mr. Speaker, that's not really an acceptable response to people who are in the situation where they are very justifiable in asking the question, what is the government's plan for reducing wait lists in hospital? Mr. Speaker, with your indulgence, I'd like to make an introduction, if that would be okay, since I don't have to yield the floor to anyone. In our West Gallery, I'm very pleased to draw the attention of members to the House of two visitors who are here visiting from the UK. They are Graham and Leslie Stevenson, who opened their home to me when I attended the University of Warwick some years ago. Graham has been to Canada before, but to the West Coast in Vancouver, and this is Leslie's first visit, and they're here for 10 days. And I'd like members to extend the warm welcome of the House to them. Have them rise.
Wild and crazy youth.
Yeah, not so wild and crazy youth. Wild and crazy middle age, but there you go. So as I was saying, Mr. Speaker, these wait times for various procedures in our healthcare system have gotten to be quite excessive, and in spite of the fact that we press the government to bring forward a very clear plan to reduce wait times, we've seen very little evidence that they're about to embark on any action that will result in a reduction of wait times, and this is very distressing. I note that the honourable member who brought forward this resolution in the Liberal Party, though, was relying on research from that right-wing think tank, the Fraser Institute, and I just can't have this opportunity to speak go by without making reference to the fact that really where the Fraser Institute is coming from with their annual reports on wait times in Canada is to try to build a case for the privatization of health care in this country and the introduction of a two-tiered system where people who have money can pay for services and people who don't have money will languish on longer and longer waiting lists, as we see in the healthcare system of our neighbors to the south. So I would caution members of the Liberal Party when they look at the research from the Fraser Institute and their use of the information from that particular right-wing institute, that they be very clear about where that particular research is coming from and what their ultimate agenda is with respect to producing that research. It is the privatization of healthcare, and I remind members that Romano and the Romano Commission very clearly pointed out that this is something that Canadians will not tolerate. It is not part of our values that we go to a privatized fee-for-service healthcare system, irrespective of the research that comes from institutes like the Fraser Institute. So, Mr. Speaker, that I think is an important point to be made. Mr. Speaker, there are many things that need to occur in order to reduce wait times. And the minister talks about the studying that will be going on in his department. And, you know, it's true that you always need to assess the situation, gather information, analyze it, and identify where your priorities lay and develop your plans. But, you know, one of the things we've seen with this government, every time we raise an issue, they're studying it, they're assessing it, they're gathering information, they've put together a work group. But we never see the results of any of these processes. And I think that now people are quite skeptical that really what is happening when we raise these questions about wait lists, The minister stands up. He has a pat answer on every issue we raise with respect to improving services for Nova Scotians in need. He used the very same set of arguments around children with autism just last week. And he has used the same argument with respect to seniors in small, unlicensed homes for care throughout the province. So it's beginning to get to be a bit of a worn pattern with this minister. He spends an awful lot of time hiding behind a process of study, and we see very little action as wait lists continue to grow. Mr. Speaker, one of the things that we in this party have talked about repeatedly and have made a very high priority is the covering of the financial costs for long-term care for seniors. And this is an issue that actually has a very direct relationship to wait times in our acute care facilities. In many of our acute care facilities, there are people who are in beds who are waiting for the financial assessment process and the appeal procedures and all of these things to unfold, who, if we did not have that financial process, Mr. Speaker, if they were entitled to the health care that they eventually will get in a home for special care, they would not be occupying an acute care bed. And Mr. Speaker, we can go all around the province and speak to healthcare workers in the tertiary care facilities, and they will tell us of the numbers of seniors and people with serious illnesses requiring long-term care who are what they call blocking beds to people who need to come in for surgery because of this draconian financial assessment process that has taken so much of the hard-working life savings and resources of people in our province. And I would urge the minister in his mix of studies to take a look at the amount of bed days that are taken in our acute care facilities by people who are waiting for nursing home care. To deal with that aspect of our healthcare system would really make a huge difference in terms of reducing wait times, and it is certainly a very high priority for members of my party. Mr. Speaker, we heard today about cuts in pediatric services in the Aberdeen Hospital, and we learned that the minister says that, well, there was excess capacity in that unit. The beds were only used 66% of the time. And so this is his justification for reducing services, pediatric services, in that facility. But we've also learned that those beds weren't just used for sick children. Perhaps 66% of the time there were sick children in those beds. But the rest of the time, those beds were actually being used for adults with serious surgical needs, and those beds were used to take pressure off the ER. I was told this, the former Minister of Health says, well, who told you that? Well, I'll tell the former Minister of Health. He should have talked a little bit more when he was the Minister of Health to nurses in the healthcare system, because nurses in the healthcare system are the people who know these things. And as you know, Minister, they were here today. There were nurses here today, and they basically said, as they listened to the minister, well, just wait a second here. He's only telling you half the story, which is what this government generally does. It tells you half the story. And the little piece that they're leaving out here, Mr. Speaker, was the whole the whole fact that those beds, in fact, are fully utilized, and that what's occurred in Aberdeen today is not insignificant, but in fact, it does represent a reduction in service. It does, in fact, mean that there will be a lengthening of wait times in other aspects of that operation. And we all know, Mr. Speaker, that the reason this occurred and this is happening is that the DHAs still do not have their operating budgets for this fiscal year that we're in right now. And this government has failed to tell those health care providers what the total envelope by the end of the year is going to look like. And the result of that is that they're starting to panic and look for places where they can cut. And unfortunately, if you're going to make cuts in a healthcare system that's already stretched to the limit, you're going to have reductions in service. Mr. Speaker, we've had 10 years of austerity in healthcare in this country and in this province, former Liberal governments, current Conservative government, where we have seen the wait times grow. And throughout the remainder of this session, it will be the focus of this party to continue to press for a plan, and a clear plan with some action attached to make sure those wait times decrease. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is certainly a pleasure today to rise on a very, very important resolution, one regarding wait times, and perhaps in case in this particular issue, the general state of health care in the province. And I would like to draw attention to the House, and in particular to the honourable member opposite who just spoke, that on Monday of this week, NDP leader Darrell Dexter released figures from the Fraser Institute, a conservative think tank in Vancouver, that indicate it's taking longer for people to get several types of surgery and MRI exams.
What's Darrell doing believing in the Fraser Institute? How could Darrell call the Fraser Institute a private think tank?
And I would like to table this.
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. All members know that it's not permitted in the House to name members by their name, but either by their constituency or their portfolio or by their position. So, Honourable Member Kings West has the floor.
Say the big guy, official opposition.
I shall use the name of the official leader of the opposition.
That's official opposition leader. Yeah, that's it.
The points that he did go on to make in his article, various quantitative information was provided in result of research across the province. In almost all the studies on wait times for various procedures, Nova Scotia was at the bottom of the list. Number of procedures waited for rose from 2001, 2002 in Nova Scotia, and it has the longest wait in the country for an MRI at 24 weeks. Waiting period referral by GP to appointment with a specialist has also risen in the past year, and the wait is now listed at 8.8 weeks. The waiting period from appointment with specialist to treatment has also risen to 10.6 weeks. So that's a general state of where we are on wait times, and it is not, I don't think, very comforting, perhaps to the government and to any of us, when we take a look at an overview of health issues in the Atlantic, August 7, 2003, and in that issue, as they reviewed August 5th, they said losses to the government included 3 seats in the Annapolis Valley where health issues weighed heavily during the campaign. And certainly I can speak very clearly to that particular area of the province and the impact that a $7 million reduction in the healthcare budget and how it had impacted on our area and continues to impact. Just weeks after the announcement of the $7 million cut,
the base commander at CFB Greenwood, before Kings County Council, made some of the following statements. Some military personnel refused transfers to 14 Wing Greenwood, the largest Air Force base in Atlantic Canada, because the area is lacking in health and education services, says the base commander. They're a very sophisticated population. They have significant demands, Colonel Morey said in his annual report to Kings County Council's Committee of the Whole. And certainly that is very much in evidence in our community. And I know in a couple of weeks' time, when I once again meet with the Colonel, I am sure that this will be one of the topics high on his agenda. That is the fact that waiting time to get a GP. And if other members of the House had the opportunity to go through PMQs, which I had just 3 months ago, I was astounded simply at the number of military personnel, this is the families, who do not have a family doctor in our area. In fact, my family doctor, who did much visiting with me, concluded he could easily start another practice from those who do not have a GP at the moment. And certainly we are fortunate in our area that they are, for the most part, young, healthy families, but it is certainly not comforting that many now are without, which again puts pressure on the emergency services at Soldiers Memorial Hospital. Many of these people without a GP have to wait their turn in outpatients to see a doctor. And certainly that's another situation which in our area certainly seems to be deteriorating by the day. We've had one weekend, one 24-hour period, when there was no coverage in emergency at Soldiers Memorial Hospital, and according to local doctors, certainly the first time that this has occurred in the period in which they can remember, and some now have practiced there for between 30 and 40 years. So this again shows a deterioration of health care services in the Annapolis Valley. Just doing a quick little tally, we basically now have 63 acute care beds for about 100,000 population. And for example, on Thursday of last week, and I know the Premier can relate to this because when he came to announce $1 million last spring for a study and also for a little bit towards the cut of the $7 million made a little bit earlier, he saw 13 people in the overflow who were waiting for beds. Just in Thursday of this past week, there were 18 in the overflow who did not know whether they would get admitted that day, whether they'd be able to have their surgery, based on the recovery time, if they would need a room and so forth. So that's the state of wait times and a deteriorating situation that we have in the Valley. Certainly, I got a very, very clear indication of perhaps some of the 1% cut that the health departments will have to reel themselves in by, because the nurses union were developing a contingency plan last week because they were told that overtime would not be an option, and that they would have to come up with a clinical strategy for dealing with the extra patient or two patients that they would have to deal with in the ICU or in emergency at Valley Regional. So which certainly indicates a growing wait time for many of the services in our area. Last week also, two major surgeries were canceled, and just in April of this year, it was calculated that canceled surgeries at the regional hospital in Kentville had gone up 70% from the previous year. So we can see the kind of backlog that is impacting on our area. And this is only going to grow. We've had the 42 acute care beds at Valley Regional reduced to 37, I think just since the House started its sitting. They've gone over to long-term care. So at the root of the cause here certainly is long-term care and getting those people who are in transition into nursing homes. So that is certainly one of the biggest needs that we are facing now, is getting patients out of hospital and into the kind of care that will allow for a proper transition. I think I would be remiss in not talking a little bit about the fact that while we use the past, and sometimes often in this House, the past 4 or 5 years, as a starting point to take a look and compare how things are going, and looking at the present state of Valley District Health Authority, we know that they are under immense pressure, and I know the members opposite from that area of Kings North and Kings South know the tremendous quality of healthcare professionals we have, but we also know the tremendous stresses under which they're performing, and it looks like that's going to be continuing. But it would be, I think I'd be a bit remiss if I didn't kind of also point a little bit towards looking at the future. And we all know that investment in preventive medicine, in developing a healthy population here in Nova Scotia is really the long-term solution, because that certainly over the course of a lifetime and all of the residents of Nova Scotia, it certainly would reduce people having to wait in line for many medical procedures. Many countries, many jurisdictions have made a lot of progress in that area, while we have opened the health promotion add-on to the Department of Health, or I should say, I guess, Recreation. Certainly, there's a lot of concern growing that perhaps the dollars won't be there now in a tight fiscal situation. But certainly, when you take a look, the Conference Board of Canada last year estimated that it cost businesses more than $2,000 per year to employ a smoker rather than a non-smoker. Workplace health promotion yields a return of $2 for every dollar invested, something many employers are beginning to understand. So preventable chronic diseases cost Nova Scotia economy 5% of GDP. So this is a major, major concern area. So it's obvious then we must say, why is a 10% tax cut seen as an economic stimulant when a healthy population often is not? Why is our healthcare system preoccupied with treating illness and thereby running up healthcare costs instead of preventing disease and keeping costs down? And just to review a little bit, smoking, obesity, physical inactivity, and poor nutrition cost the healthcare system $500 million per year. And that's enough money to make university education free, pay for the health care costs of seniors in nursing homes, twin 50 kilometers of highway, pay the salaries of 100 nurse practitioners, and still have money for a 10% tax cut. So why is the government putting $49 million of $50 million from an increased annual tobacco tax to our general revenues, and thereby to a tax cut that will yield less than $8 per week for a family earning $40,000 a year? So that's a question I think that all of us are facing. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this time today.
Thank you. Thank you. That brings to the end of the hours for the debate. Call upon the Honourable Government House Leader for tomorrow's hours and order of business.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, move the House to now rise to meet again on the morrow at the hour of 12 noon. The House will sit from 12 until 8 p.m. And the order of business following the daily routine and question period, we'll go on a committee of the whole House on bills, and we'll consider Bill number 1 and Bill number 6. And if we still have sufficient time, Mr. Speaker, we'll go on to public bills for second reading and go on to Bill number 20, the Workers' Compensation Act.
Motion is the House adjourned to 12 noon tomorrow. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The House is adjourned until 12 noon tomorrow. This brings us to the moment of interruption. The subject for this evening's late debate was submitted by the Honourable Member for Kings North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. and I'm pleased to speak to this resolution. I should sharpen up the resolution because I'm aware that civics or citizenship, as the modern terminology is, although I prefer the word civics because of its connection with civil society and the emphasis upon civility. But I'm aware that in grade, I believe it's grade 6, they teach how the municipal system works. In grade 7, the provincial system. In grade 8, the federal system. And of course, I want to laud our government for introducing courses on Canadian citizenship, on Canadian history in grade 11. And I hope that as those take hold, that it will be be able to resolve some of the concern that I want to bring before the House this evening. But nonetheless, for whatever reason, in spite of the fact that we have these elements in the coursework in grade 6, 7, and 8, students are abysmally ignorant of our political system and of their duties and responsibilities as citizens, as members of the country of Canada, and as citizens within the province.